Cerro Torre is one of the most typical, isolated, and iconic mountains on the planet. It rises to an altitude of 3,128 meters above sea level. It straddles the border between Chile and Argentina and the Southern Patagonia in South America. Cerro Torre soars nearly 1,524 meters from base to summit. The peak is the highest of a four mountain chain. The other peaks are Torre Egger, Punta Herron, and Cerro Standhardt. The top of Cerro Torre often has a mushroom of rime ice, formed by the constant strong winds, increasing the difficulty of reaching the actual summit. In 1959, Italian climber Cesare Maestri claimed that he and Torre Egger had reached the summit of Cerro Torre, and that Egger had been swept to his death by an avalanche while they were descending. Maestri stated that Egger had the camera with the pictures of the summit, but this camera was never found. It wasn't until much later that doubts began to be expressed. Inconsistencies in Maestri's account, in the lack of balls, pitons, or fake roofs on the route, have led most mountaineers to doubt Maestri's claim. To silence his skeptics, Maestri went back to Cerro Torre in 1970 to open a new route on the southeast face. Although his first ascent was disputed, it's for his second attempt that he gained notoriety. Armed with a 150-kilogram petrol-driven compressor air drill, Maestri equipped 350 meters of rock with bolts and got to the end of the rocky foot of the mountain, just below the ice mushroom. He then refused to climb the final 50-meter ice mushroom on the summit, saying it wasn't really part of the mountain and would fall off eventually. His bizarre stunt backfired. The route only reinforced his skeptics' suspicion that the 1959 first ascent was an outright hoax. It's this bold ladder that has so offended climbing purists since. Many say he murdered the mountain. Maestri was heavily criticized for the unfair means he used to climb the mountains. The compressor was left, tied to the last bolts, 100 meters below the top. The route Maestri opened is now known as the compressor route. Most climbers consider the ascent complete only if they summit the typical ice rime mushroom. For 40 years, the compressor route has been the de facto normal route up Cerro Torre. 90% of the ascent have been via this route, where climbers have some 400 bolts they can choose to attach to most of the way up to the summit. The first true and undisputed ascent of Cerro Torre was made in 1974, when a four-man Italian team led by Casimiro Ferrari succeeded on the west face. In 1977, the first alpine ascent of Cerro Torre was completed by Americans Dave Carmen, John Bragg, and Jay Wilson. They took a week to summit Cerro Torre, which had taken the Italian group 2 months to summit. The compressor route was climbed to the summit in 1979 by Jim Bedwell and Stu Brewer. In 1980, a New Zealand climber, Bill Dins, attempted the first solo ascent of the compressor route. Over a 5-month period, he made 13 vigorous attempts but was driven back by storms on every occasion. On his last attempt, in November 1980, he got to within 60 meters of the summit. In January 2008, Ronaldo Garibati and Colin Haley made the first complete traverse of the entire massif, climbing Abuja Standard, Punta Herron, Torre Egger, and Cerro Torre together. In 2010, David Lama was held responsible for around 30 new bolts and hundreds of meters of fake roof added to the compressor route on the mountain. Many of the bolts were drilled next to cracks, which are usually used by climbers for protection on the route. Although Lama was not aware of the sheer number of balls that were drilled, he took full responsibility for the actions. Lama stated that a free repetition of the original compressor route is virtually impossible. In particular, as the rock of the last pitches comprised no climbable features. In January 2012, Hayden Kennedy from America and Jason Kruk from Canada made the first spear means ascent of the Southeast Ridge, near the controversial compressor route, using only two of Mastery's original belay anchors on the head wall. Even so, their impressive climb may still have been a footnote had they not removed 125 volts from the Southeast Ridge on their descent, effectively erasing the compressor route from the mountain in a matter of hours. There has been much discussion concerning the removal of bolts from the compressor route by Kennedy and Kruk. They believed they were doing the right thing, that they were claiming the route back again for the forest. Yet when they arrived in the village of Charlton, police arrested them and confiscated 102 bolts from them. While most people agree Mastery should never have put the bolts there in the first place, opinion is hardly divided about whether they should have been removed, and even more so about the manner of their removal, by two climbers on one side of the debate taking the decision unilaterally. Clearly, many lesser climbers would now be unable to climb Cerro Torre. Should Kennedy and Kruk have been entitled to deny them the chance just because they are better climbers and have different beliefs? However, the consensus amongst the climbing community is that of agreement for removing the bolts, and it has embraced their action as having restored Cerro Torre's Southeast Ridge to the realm of genuine adventure. In January 2022, Tommy Aguilu, 36, from Argentina, and Cora Fisher, 41, from Italy, set up to materialize their long dream of climbing Cerro Torre. Cora met Aguilu in his house on the 21st of January. They had 2 days to rest in the town. They hired porters to lighten their backpacks. Access to the Torre Valley was increasingly difficult, tiring and long due to the retreat of the glaciers. On the 24th of January, they started walking with light backpacks. It took them 8 hours to get to the camp. To their surprise, the wall was quite snowy. The rainfall was more humid than normal. They decided to leave the next day to clean the wall. They took advantage in the morning and set 3 pitches. They left some material at the bottom of the route and returned to the camp to rest. They woke up at 1:15 a.m. on the 26th of January at Norvegos. They approached the glacier, climbed the 3 ropes, and continued climbing. Around noon, they arrived at their bivouac, at the altitude of the English box but just opposite, on a rock spur where there was a natural shelf with a large protective granite slab. After leaving their bivouac equipment and part of the weight, they continued towards the north face for a long time along some diagonal ramps, until they reached the starting point of their line on the same north face. They climbed and fixed the first pitch of 50 meters, which was the most difficult. After fixing this first pitch, they abseiled and returned to the bivouac. At midnight on the 27th of January, they began climbing the fixed ropes at 1 a.m. They left their bivouac material on the ledge and decided to climb to the summit non-stop and descend the same route at night. Despite climbing at night, they managed to make rapid progress, reaching the Berg Fracture Traverse in just 6 hours. Cora moved on to take the lead from there, as due to his skills on icy and mixed terrain. At 11 a.m., they were at the highest point previously reached. From there up it was virgin, but they had studied it very well with photos from other years from the Egger Tower. Cora started to climb up a crack system, navigating through frost, clinging to the wall until he reached a natural ledge, where he set up the next belay. Aguiló quickly climbed off, and they hauled the bag. The next patch looked amazing, a system of parallel cracks and pristine granite. Cora fragged the stuff rapidly. At that point, the Italian party of Matteo della Bodella, Matteo di Zaicamo, and David Baxi, who was also trying to open a new route on Cerro Torre, caught up with them following their steps. Only 300 meters remained to the top of the tower, and they decided to join forces for the final fight. Cora took the lead, followed by Aguiló and the three Italians. Around 5:20 p.m., Cora and Aguiló reached the top, opening a new route on one of the world's most iconic towers. An hour later, the three Italians joined them. They also opened a new route on Cerro Torre. The two groups congratulated each other on the summit. Moments later, their paths separated. Both groups stuck to their own descent plans. Cora and Aguiló wanted to descend the north face at night to take advantage of the cold nighttime condition for their descent. Loose rock and unstable ice formation had a greater likelihood of staying in place. Della Bodella's team was exhausted from multi-day effort, preferred to spend the night on the top, and hoped to descend the southeast ridge via the old compressor route. Around 7 p.m. on the 28th of January, Cora and Aguiló started their descent in the dark and reached the mushroom where they had arrived in 2019. There, they decided to wait until 10 p.m. for temperature to drop in the world to stop drifting. Thereafter, they continued the descent to their bivouac, arriving at about 2 a.m., where they stopped to hydrate and eat something. They discussed continuing on, but changed their minds, deciding to get some rest. They covered their legs with their sleeping bags and dozed off. At around 3:30 a.m., a loud noise woke them up from their sleep. In the dark, they heard a huge avalanche approaching from above, directly at them. It was all so fast that they couldn't tell each other anything. They both leaned to the right in an attempt to protect themselves. Aguiló took the whole bag to try to use it as a shield, but it was useless. After a few seconds of multiple hits, a big head compressed them against the ground. A rime ice mushroom had collapsed from above, sending down tons of rock, ice, and snow on Cora and Aguiló. The avalanche cut their lifelines and they rolled some meters down, miraculously stopping before the vertical wall. Aguiló was seriously injured and Cora was completely paralyzed. Aguiló suffered several fractures and a collapsed lung. Cora's fractures were even more worse and included a fractured pelvis and possibly a broken spine. He couldn't move. The pain was extreme in the dark. Aguiló turned on the flashlight and realized that their lifelines had been cut and they were unsecured on an ice shelf without crampons. He looked towards their bivouac and couldn't believe what he saw. A large granite slab that protected them had disappeared. Also on that block hung all their gear. They lost all the equipment. Aguiló desperately looked for the in-reach device, but there were no traces of anything. It seemed that it had flown away with the rest of the gear 600 meters down to the glacier. In the wee hours of the morning, Aguiló made light SOS for someone to miraculously see them, but there was no response. Even if someone had responded, there would be no guarantee that they would rescue them, since in Echalton there were no helicopters or pilots prepared to perform wall rescues. When an emergency occurs in the mountains of Echalton, there is little time to react. where the windows are so short and shut so abruptly. The other problem is that potential rescuers on the mountains are typically exhausted after their own demanding climbs. These needles are extremely difficult. Helicopters can't pick up the climbers on the vertical walls. Few practical routes exist for potential rescuers. For about 3 hours, Cora and Aguilo assumed that they would die. Cora was lying in the same place where he was after the accident, and Aguilo was sitting 2 meters above. The only thing he could do was to secure Cora with a piece of rope that they had left so that he didn't fall. The physical pain was extreme, and the sadness of accepting death was inexplicable. When dawn broke, Aguilo put on a crampon that he found, got up and took a few steps on the ledge. The crampon caught on a bag of food that was buried 10 centimeters under the crushed ice. Aguilo's hope of finding the enriched device came back. He kicked to the sides and found a small bag with the enrich. Aguilo sent 3 help messages to different contacts explaining what happened and activated the SOS. The messages didn't go out because they were in a very vertical terrain that made the satellite signal difficult. Aguilo didn't want to leave Cora alone, but Cora encouraged him to go down. He claimed that he had no chance of surviving due to his injuries. Aguilo couldn't move one hand and could barely move the other. He was in a lot of pain. After a while, Aguilo realized that the only way to send the messages is by moving from the place. And also to have a chance of being rescued, he has to descend at least a greater part. Aguilo and Cora's parting words will forever remain something private between them. But given Cora's understanding of the essence of mountaineering, one can only imagine that he understood his situation and that, given the conditions, a rescue was not going to happen. It's all conjecture, of course, but it's not hard to surmise that he strongly encouraged Aguilo to at least try to save his own life. Around 6:30 a.m., Aguilo took the courage. With tears in his eyes, he said goodbye to Cora, saying that he hold on, rescue will come. He then took a 50-meter rope and began to descend very slowly. The pain was agonizing. Over the following 10 hours, Aguilo made very slow downward progress, taking over an hour for each 20-meter rappel. Unable to use his arms much, he used a juma and his leg to pull down the rope. He passed out at belays and needed full concentration, pain avoidance, and motivation to continue. Finally, he arrived at the Navarro Triangle, very tired, almost without gear. To continue descending, he had to first traverse 60 meters to the left with a crampon and ice axe on a 60-degree slope. With his physical condition, with all the injuries and limitation he suffered, it was almost suicidal. He decided at that point to wait for the rescue. At 9:45 p.m., he could see the first rescuer just 30 meters away. After 18 hours of uncertainty, he knew that he will be survived. In the valley below, fellow climbers had seen Aguilo's headlamp distress signal around 5 a.m. They had replied and had given notice, but Aguilo didn't see it. A rescue attempt was underway. At the Nefuneno camp, climbers organized and without a clear plan headed towards the face. Because Aguilo was making steady downward progress, because of the danger caused by the day's high temperatures, and because they were unprepared to start climbing such a face, it was decided to wait. At 10:30 a.m., rescuers left Charlton on foot carrying a stretcher and other rescue gear. 2 more groups soon followed. At 1:45 p.m., a helicopter arrived at Charlton and was able to transport 5 climbers to Nefuneno, the highest landing spot considered safe. From there, they made their way to the base, where they were joined by other climbers. Meanwhile, during the night on top of the tower, Bodela, Bakshi, and Zaikama were unaware of the events. By 5 p.m. on the 28th of January, Bodela's team had finished their 30 rifles down the compressor route and met up with the rescue party at the base of the wall. At that point, they were at the limit of their strength. Horrified to learn of the accident, Della Bodella used his drone to pinpoint Ogelu's location on the wall and readied himself for a rescue mission. Though mentally and physically drained, Della Bodella knew he was the ideal person to lead a rescue. He had climbed that section of the east face just days before. He knew where to go and the gear to bring. At about 6 p.m., they started the rescue operation for Ogelu, under the leadership of Della Bodella. Together with Roger Shiley of Switzerland, Thomas Huber of Germany, and Roberto Trio of Argentina, they climbed 7 pitches of the mastery route, up to the triangular snowfield, in about 3 hours. Huber coordinated the operation on the wall. The group traversed about 60 meters to reach Ogelu at around 9:45 p.m., 26 hours after he raised the alarm. It was already midnight. They managed to secure Ogelu, then Huber and Tro began to carry the stricken climber down. Della Bodella and Shiley remained on the wall, unwilling to give up on their rescue. Cora was gravely injured and wasn't showing any signs of life. His exact location was unclear. Della Bodella and Shiley stayed there with just one available roof. They tried to call Cora, but there was no answer and they couldn't hear or see anything. Ogelu had told them that Cora was about 300 meters higher. Despite an incoming storm, Della Bodella and Shiley waited on the triangular snowfield until 3 a.m. Temperatures plummeted. The wind howled. It wasn't until Della Bodella began to hallucinate from exhaustion that they too began to descend for their own safety. By then, it was so cold that Della Bodella couldn't feel his feet. At 1:30 a.m., Ogelu was finally brought down to the ground. He was placed on a sledge stretcher and was lowered across the glacier to reach Norwegosh by 4:30 a.m., where he was switched to a rigid stretcher and lowered down the dangerous moraine towards Neponeno. The weather worsened significantly, with wind gusts to blow at 80 km per hour. By the time Della Bodella and Shiley returned to the glacier, Ogelu's rescue was in full swing. At 9 a.m., Ogelu was flown off. The helicopter landed briefly in Echalton, where Ogelu was checked by a doctor, and then flew him to the Samik Hospital in Ekalafate, 250 kilometers away. Ogelu was treated for a punctured lung, broken clavicle and ribs, among other injuries. Few days later, he was released from the hospital. The teamwork was incredible. More than 40 people were involved, from Argentina and many other nations. And after sitting up from Echalton, they worked selflessly all night long, exposing themselves to huge risks for 40 hours without sleeping in order to get Ogelu to safety. This is yet another great demonstration of solidarity in the mountaineering community. A drone continued to search for Cora, but further rescue attempts were called up due to a storm on the mountain. Rescuers were able to zoom in on the images of a drone flown near the place of accident. Cora's body was seen. It was slid 50 meters below the platform where he had spent the night. Although some held hope that Cora could be saved, reality said otherwise. To be moved with the injuries he had, Rescuers would have likely needed a vacuum mattress, a rigid stretcher, and means that simply couldn't be carried 600 meters up the east face of Cerro Torre, a notoriously dangerous place. There were no pilots or helicopters in Argentina able to perform long-line rescues. A week after the accident, the weather provided a small opening. A drone was flown to establish the location of Cora's remains, but they couldn't be found. It's presumed he fell and disappeared in the glacier below, buried by new avalanches and snowfalls. Rescuers, however, found his equipment, the ropes, food, and backpack. It was decided to abandon further efforts to find him because the area where he is presumed to be is threatened by rock and icefall. Cora Fisher finally completed his dream project that he had been working on for many years, but at the cost of his life. The duo named their line as La Notte. The cost of the Notte was very high. They were not willing to pay so much, and so the north face of Cerro Torre was climbed. The north face is crowned by enormous rime mushrooms. This makes the face particularly dangerous, as it's bombarded by falling debris almost constantly. Cora was one of the strongest and most respected alpinists of his generation. Throughout his career, he continuously pushed alpinism to new levels in new places, from Chamonix to the Himalayas to Patagonia. He was a force in the mountains, and it seems nothing could stop him once he set his mind to it. Many climbers have been inspired by his lifestyle, his values, and his deeply grounded way of life. Everything he did with his own signature style. He wasn't only a legend in his adopted Chamonix, but a highly respected and beloved figure among the Spanish alpinists. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video and are new here, please consider subscribing to the channel for more such videos to come in the future.